Hi everyone, welcome to Caterpillar Cross Stitch channel. My name is Marie and I am here today to talk to you about parking method or an introduction into a parking method, what it is, my best tips, etc. In this video, I will be using this piece of cake cross stitch kit. This is because it is full coverage and there are quite a number of color changes in this area. So it is quite a good candidate for the parking method. Before we dive in on how to actually do parking method, let me just explain to you a little bit how does it differ from everything else and why do we even want to consider a parking method. So first of all, everybody, I guess, naturally will start with doing a so-called cross-country stitching method. That method is that you simply take a color that is called for, you thread your needle and you cross stitch as many symbols of that color as your thread length allows, or as much as you are comfortable with. Maybe you've got a piece of white in here and maybe the next available piece of white is over in here. So in cross-country method, you would either stitch this piece and then you would count one by one by one by one, and then you would finish it while sort of dragging your thread behind the back of your project. But what happens more frequently is that you look at it and you think, okay, these are a bit too far from one another. Let me actually just stitch this white piece here, finish the thread, cut it off, put it away, and pick the white thread whenever I have, I am in sort of countable distance from the area when it is next needed. So in other words, cross-country stitching is full of starting and ending threads. It is focusing on a certain area, maybe it's focused on a certain object. You might be focusing on stitching a door, so you are going to finish stitching the door, or you might be finished on stitching roof, so you're going to finish stitching the roof, or letters, so on and so forth. All of that while starting and ending your threads as and when you sort of need them or don't need them anymore. In contrast, parking method has been invented, I guess is the correct way to use. I don't know who has first come up with parking method, so I'm really sorry that I'm not crediting a specific person with this, although I would love to. So somebody very, very clever who was focusing on doing large full coverage cross stitch pieces, one of those 300,000 stitches that will take you years and years to finish. And they thought that there must be a more methodical way or an easier way of how to approach these large full coverages. Or they probably thought it at least. What they came up with was what we now call parking method. And parking method is aimed at saving time and bulk in the back by not finishing threads when we no longer need them in that area, and also being very, very methodical about the approach to the stitching. So while in cross country we might do the door, as I mentioned, or a window or a cake, in parking method we usually very strictly focus on an area of a design. For example, 10 by 10. Very frequently you will focus just on 10 by 10 area, and you fill out that area, and once you are done with it, you move on. Now, while you're stitching in here, if you have stitched all of your white symbols in here, you are not going to finish that thread. You are going to park it in the next available area that you are going to move on to stitch next. So you are saving yourself finishing the thread, you are saving yourself maybe running it behind the stitches in the back, because the stitching does get very busy on full coverage pieces where you're not dealing with 10 colors, you're dealing with 93. And if you have a very confetti heavy area, you might have to change 20, 30 colors in one area easily. When I mention confetti, it means standalone stitches. So just like when you take a confetti and throw it on the floor, you've got all sorts of colors, spot here, spot there, etc. This is what we use to describe a situation where you've got one stitch of a color in the area we stitch on, and there is no other stitch of that color anywhere near. Okay, so now we know that parking method is saving us a lot of time by saving us from starting and stopping the thread all the time. Instead, we just park it for later use. And it is also helping us tackle large full coverage pieces one bite at a time by making us focus on one single piece of the design, usually 10 by 10, and you only move on once you finished it, so that you have a very, very methodical approach to your stitching. Now, caterpillar cross-stitch designs usually, really do not require the deployment of parking method, but we really wanted to introduce you into this method, and therefore we are using this sort of simpler project to help you understand a more complex, more perhaps advanced technique of cross-stitching. First of all, I should highlight that there are generally only two rules to successfully sort of stitching with parking method. First one is to grid your fabric. My personal preferred method is to just take a friction pen and do just a small dot in every 10 by 10 corner, and because this is full coverage, I am not worried about friction pen coming back or the stain sort of not washing out completely, or this is actually heat erasable. So, I don't know if my hairdryer is not going to take all of it away, or my iron, I'm not going to be worried, because you can hardly see it anymore. There was a dot here, it's so covered. There was a dot somewhere here, it's very full coverage covers all of these things. So you don't generally need to be very afraid of using any sort of heat erasable or water soluble pen, because it is all going to be covered by your full coverage stitches. And the second rule is know where you start your stitch. Mine always start in the bottom left hand corner for the purposes of this full coverage piece. I sometimes swap around, but for full coverage you will need to always stick with just one way of doing your stitches. And once you've decided that, you will always park your thread on the same spot, and there is where you begin the stitch. And once you come to that area, you can see, okay, my pink color, this is where I need to begin the stitch, and because it's parked right down here in the bottom left corner, I know that this is going to be the stitch. It's not going to be this one, it's not going to be this one, it's not going to be this one, but because I am always consistent with where I park the thread, I know it is going to be this one. This sort of helps you to keep on top of many different colors. As I said, right now we've got some 9-10 colors going on. That's really not difficult to keep track of. But once you have a big heaven and earth designs a project that has got 90, 100, 120, or however many colors, you will really want to be very methodical, and staying consistent will help you to stitch this method very successfully. Let's begin. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to continue stitching where I left off, and I'm going to be talking you through what I'm doing, the different things I could be doing, because there are as many approaches to parking method as there are stitches. It's like anything else in our stitching world. All we can do is recommend or explain, but you will always find your own way that you like, that you prefer, and that makes you enjoy your stitching more. So let me start explain as I'm going, and we'll take it from there. So ordinarily, I would just start on the top here, finishing this 10 by 10 area, but because it's just basically, two large areas of colors, I am going to continue with this 10 by 10 area that has got a lot more color changes, and that will allow me to explain a little bit more the way I would approach, or I approach, parking method. Okay, so I've got my little Z in here. I know that it's in the previous sort of 10 by 10, but when I start stitching here on the white area here, this sort of parked thread would come in the way because I'll have to go into that hole. So I decided that I am going to stitch it, the sort of confetti stitch, because it's a standalone. And then I am going to park it right over here, okay? So let me count. So I'm going to stitch this, and then I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. So third hole to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth hole to fifth hole down. As I said, I'm always going to park in the bottom left. So that's where I'm going to count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we'll do 1, 2, 3 to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Aiming down. Okay, and now I'm just going to, put it on the side. I've got these little sort of handy thingies on my stand, so I can use it to hold my thread, but some people use a needle minder or anything else that can catch the threads so that they don't become sort of tangled in your work. The next color I want to stitch on is the white color over here. So I've already parked my thread here, so I'm just going to pick it up. Let me stitch all this area. Now, when I say I am a cross-country stitcher by heart, I really mean it. So I tend to use some of the cross-country stitching in the full coverage in the parking method as well. So what I'm going to do, usually, I'm going to stitch, for example, all the stitches that are bundled up together of that same color, even though they are not on the same line. What other people often do, or what I've seen other people do with the parking method, is that they will go and they will finish every single stitch. So they will do full cross, full cross, full cross, full cross, full cross. Then they will take the next called for color. They will finish the whole line, and they will methodically then go to the next line and again do every single stitch of what is called from right to left on this line, and then they will go to the next line, and then they will again methodically do stitch by stitch by stitch on whatever is called for. And it's called, apparently it's called a snake method, so you can go sort of very, very methodically. Now I prefer, if I've got a bunch of white white stitches called for in here, I am just going to finish them regardless of the fact that they are on a different line from each other. Okay, so I have finished all my white stitches in the 10 by 10 area that were available to me. So what I'm going to do, I can see that there is a line of white stitches right over here in the next 10 by 10 area. So I am going to park it right here in the first available stitch, because I usually stitch from left to right. So I will look at, I will be looking for parking it in the leftmost and topmost stitch that is available to me. So there is my grid from when I was gridding it. So I know that this is where my 10 by 10 starts, and I know that this is, you know, the next one, because I never spilled into the next area. Unlike here, you see that I couldn't resist. I am a cross-country stitcher. I just kept on stitching. Very bad. And I've left it in the bottom left corner of my stitch, ready to pick up and continue stitching that line. So I am going to just leave this here, leave it hanging, and I'm going to move on with another color. Okay, so that now our white is finished, the next logical step to me is to take this sort of greenish color and finish this block over here, and then park it when I am finished with filling out all the green color in this 10 by 10. Now I've come to a section where I need to do one stitch with this green color, then one stitch with the pink color, and then continue on doing the green color. Now what I'm going to do is, because it would be awkward to do this green stitch because I've got a loose thread over here, I am going to first finish my full stitch with my pink color, and then I'm going to continue with my green color. I personally always thread and unthread the threads as and when I need them, but there are people who keep a needle on each and every single one of these, so that they can just pick it up and, you know, literally just start stitching with it. It's definitely quicker. It's just about whether you've got that many needles and whether, you know, you can manage to keep them from unthreading themselves, and depending on the size of the needle you're using, and also whether that is something that you find practical. In this particular setting, I just find it easier to thread again and just get on with it. I used to be absolutely rubbish at threading my needle, and this just sort of happened on its own. So if threading a needle doesn't come easy to you, I promise it comes with experience and with having to do it far too many times. Okay, I found where my next pink stitch is going to be in this 10 by 10, so I just parked it here, and I am going to pick up the green again, and I'm going to continue stitching on it. It's good to have something to be able to sort of keep these loose threads taut, so that they don't interfere, so that they don't sort of get in the way of your work and your stitching. Okay, I'm gonna show you where I am. So now I have finished this whole sort of green area, and I've got these two little stitches that I'm going to need to finish. And then I've got this yellow area and I've got this pink area over here. So let me park this thread and crack on with the yellow area. I also forgot to mention that, so I find it really easy to keep track of where I'm parked or what's going on, because this is a fairly easy pattern. But if you have a 10 by 10 square where you've got literally 30, 40, 50 color changes, it will not be that easy to keep track of. So what you want to do in that case is to either have an electronic version of the pattern and have it in Pattern Keeper, which is literally built by and for full coverage stitches. So that is an app that I can wholeheartedly recommend, and all the big companies that focus on full coverage patterns have, you know, fully compatible PDF patterns with Pattern Keeper. But you know, Caterpillar Cross Stitch is not focusing on that area, and our patterns are a lot smaller and a lot less complex. So that's why it's fine to do just a paper pattern. It's fine to do paper pattern even if you've got one of these massive, huge pieces, but you just have to have a system. Now, what I found to be a really, really good system to have is to have a lighter highlighter and a darker highlighter. And then you're going to use the lighter one to tell yourself where you have parked. So for example, my pink one is parked here. It doesn't translate too well because it's fully in color, but I'm going to highlight this N here, and I am going to also highlight this one because this is where I have parked or where I'm going to park my thread right now. Now once I'm going to stitch it, I can just use the dark thread, the dark highlighter, just to keep track of my progress. As I said, this is going to become a lot more essential when you have a, you know, one of those very complex full coverage patterns where you absolutely need to keep track of what has been stitched and where is your thread parked. So let me park the green thread right here. And it was 1, 2 from the pink thread. Now, if I wanted to stitch here, then again, I've got the yellow thread loose right here. So I don't think it would make it very comfortable to sort of, you know, battle with this loose thread over here. So I'm going to take out the yellow thread. And again, this is just me. So I am talking you through my thought process or my planning process of the stitches. But you might find that when you are actually doing the parking method, you are going to find something completely different that suits you. And that is absolutely fine. I want to just, you know, make sure you understand that nothing anyone ever tells you with regards to parking method is how you must do things. That is just people's personal preferences or best practices. And if it suits you, that's perfect. If it doesn't, make it your own. I think that, for example, most people when they do parking method, they don't do the Danish method of stitching of half stitches and go back to finish them off. I think it is a lot more usual if you look at other tutorials, it is a lot more usual that people will do a full stitch and then move on and do a full stitch and then move on and so forth. This is also because this, like I said, is a pattern that has got, you know, a lot of larger areas, although it does have some, you know, confetti stitches, as we can see. So it does benefit from the parking method. It is not as complex as some of the full coverages I have seen where parking method and being very, very methodical about your stitching truly is absolutely necessary. Okay, now I have finished stitching all of the yellow stitches, and normally I would be able to park it down here, but because I've, you know, forgot myself and already stitched this area, I can't see anything around that where I could park my yellow thread, so I am actually going to finish it. I'm going to really quickly show you that I do a pin stitch, so I just find a suitable spot towards the right of my stitching. This is just how I do it, and I will pin stitch it into Ada. It will get you know, buried quite a lot, so when you stitch over it you won't really see it, and I'm going to clip it off. If you'd like a bigger, sort of better or more thorough tutorial on how to do this, we have 4 ways to end a thread video that I'm going to link up here, so make sure you check that one out. Now it's time to make some decisions. So I've got some parked threads over here, and I think it's going to be the best if I fill out this sort of brown color here, and I am going to then move on with filling out the pink, the green, and then again move on to brown. What I forgot to do when I finished with my yellow stitches is to highlight it, and because I finished the thread, I didn't park it anywhere. I don't have to take my second highlighter to sort of highlight where I've parked it. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. Let me methodically going from top to bottom, then that means that I am going to be stitching on the brown here next. Now I thought I'd just mention this because this is something that I can see asked very, very frequently. So what do I do when I normally start my stitch in bottom left corner, but I have just finished my stitch, the top leg of my stitch in the same hole? What do I do? The easiest solution, you just start your bottom leg in the opposite corner, bring it down, and then do your top leg the usual way, just as if you know, just that you would do it normally. And that means you're not bringing the thread back. Let me show you what I mean. So normally I end my thread here, but if I want to start stitching, if I want to put my stitch here, I start in this corner. So it means that I'm just going to unstitch my top leg. So as I said, I'm just going to go bring my needle up in the opposite corner and then do my top leg as usual. Simple fix. Okay, that's me done with the brown color in this section, and the next place where I can see that this is going to be needed is right here. So I am going to count from my stitch here. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, holes. 1, 2, 3 holes. So this is where I'm going to park my thread. And although, you know, it's very much just for demonstration purposes because you won't be able to see it much, then I'm just going to mark this with my parked color, so I know my thread is parked right here. And let me continue with these. So the way I'm going to decide about what I'm going to stitch next, I am going to focus on these two, on the gray and the pink. On green and pink. And if I imagine how I am going to be stitching it, if I stitched pink first, I would have to deal with this loose thread right over here that could get into the way of my stitching. So I am going to do the green first, actually, park it away, move it away, and then pick the pink thread and continue stitching. Now again, I have finished this area, but there is absolutely nothing around here in the surrounding areas where, you know, I could park my pink thread. So on this occasion, I am going to do the same thing as with my yellow thread a little while ago, and I am just going to pin stitch it to finish the thread. And as and when I come across a pink color later on, I'm just going to start a new thread. Now, because I only want to do 2 more stitches with this, I'm going to show you what it is, what it sort of looks like when you don't finish stitching, or when you don't pick up the loose thread to stitch with, and you sort of stitch in that hole. So you have to like manage the thread a bit more. So I'm just going to go through here and here, and you can see that it sort of hangs a little bit weirdly here. So I would personally prefer to just stitch the green stitches and then continue with the brown stitches, but in this case I'm going to be finishing the brown thread, so it felt unnecessary to unthread and rethread just for that. So let me finish it. And let me just finish this 10 by 10 by finishing this couple of brown stitches. Yeah, that's why do as I say, not as I do, obviously, because it's really good to keep these threads caught, you know, and nicely tucked away from the path of stitching. Otherwise they can start getting in the way and getting tangled in your active stitching thread. And that is it. We have used parking method and finished one 10 by 10 area of our full coverage piece. I hope that this demonstration and my explanations made sense. If there is one thing you take away from today, it's probably that parking method is a methodical approach to cross-stitching. It makes sense primarily and perhaps even only when doing a full coverage piece, where you want that tunnel vision of focusing on one piece of 10 by 10 or whichever you choose. Maybe you want to do a larger piece, that's fine as well, it's your choice. But you focus on that area and you don't move away until it's finished. At the same time, once you are finished with the colors that are used in that area, you don't clip them off. If you can find anywhere they are used in the surrounding area. You find the symbol, you pull the thread at the point where you always start your stitch, at the place where the symbol is on the chart. And this is why it's called parking, because you have parked the thread ready to be used at a later point when you are ready to move on to continue stitching. Couple of things I wanted to mention. One thing is that I personally chose to stitch from top to bottom. A lot of stitchers have got bad experience with that because sometimes the lines caused by tension between the 10 by 10 or between the rows or the columns can show on the finished product. This is perhaps less true when you're stitching on Ada, but it is definitely a sort of high risk area when you are working on even weave on like softer fabrics that are not as tightly woven and the threads in the fabric are moving more easily. So as you're stitching, they will naturally sort of come closer together. That will be your one 10 by 10, and then your next 10 by 10 will also come closer together, and so on and so forth. And also sometimes it's caused by the buildup of the threads if you use the Danish method as I've just shown you. So those are things to be aware of. And some people say that you can prevent it by going not from top to bottom, but to go horizontally from left to right. Others swear by doing a diagonal sort of way of stitching. Others swear by tethering, so you are going to do these sort of triangles in your stitching rather than stitching a 10 by 10 area. So like I said, this is just an introduction to general principles of the parking method, but I urge you and I invite you to watch these wonderful stitches that I'm going to mention shortly and to come up with your own way of making this work if this is something you are interested in. I firmly believe that knowing parking method and knowing how to apply it is an essential skill if you plan on stitching large full coverage pieces, and it gives you a good skill set to sort of use it as and when needed. So if you can see that you've got a project that is not full coverage but has got a lot of changes, you can just swap. You can just start doing the parking method temporarily on a piece of area where it makes sense, and it's a really good skill to have. If you do give it a try, I would love to see your progress. Please tag us on Instagram or post on our Facebook group with, loads and loads of stitches, over 16,000 now, who will be ready to celebrate your learning journey of parking method with you. And that is it from us at Caterpillar Cross Stitch today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.